Good morning again, good people of a great nation. It's a pleasure to have you join us on this discussion segment on development focus with Jide Ojo on ITV. Like I said, when we opened studio at 7, I said we do have two discussions that will take place this morning. My first discussant is seated there with me, a very eminent lady, one of the industry leader when it comes to development sector. She's Abiodun Bayewu. She's the executive director of Global Rights. Global Rights used to be International Human Rights Law Group years back. Now Global Rights. She will be telling us a lot more about our background, what Global Rights does. Because when I knew Global Rights, I knew the area they were focusing on, but I think they've also take on some other areas of engagement now. So Biodun will be telling us a lot more about that. You're welcome, Abby.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.
It's a pleasure. So tell us more about yourself, what you do, and then we'll take the next stage will be to talk about Global Rights and its activities.
My name, as you've said, is Abiodun Bayewu. I'm a civil society activist. I work on capacity development on human rights and governance issues, working with Global Rights, working on issues of natural resource governance, working on issues of access to justice, on civic space strengthening and security and human rights. I'm also, at night, I'm a writer.
Interesting. That's interesting. So you are a writer, you are an activist, you are a resource governance expert, and a lot more. You also have something to do with George Washington University. Are you a lecturer there? Or what?
No, Georgetown University.
Georgetown, rather.
Yes, I was a fellow at Georgetown University.
Okay.
Yes.
So what does that mean? Does it mean you lecture there at your convenience?
Well, occasionally teaching on issues of women's rights and governance.
Okay.
Yes.
So what's exactly your background? What did you study?
I studied law.
Oh, okay.
First degree, second degree, working on my PhD right now, but
Wow.
At least for once, not law.
Interesting. So you're a lawyer. That didn't reflect in your bio, but that's fine. Tell us, Global Rights used to be involved in elections. I recall that in the early 2000s, we were doing electoral geography.
Yes.
We were involved in
Transition monitoring.
transition monitoring. I mean, Global Rights gave birth to Electoral Reform Network when Professor Jibrin Ibrahim was the country director and all of that. What accounted for the shift to natural resource governance issue?
Well, it's not a complete shift away from governance issues. Governance issues were there. But you recall that back in those days, we're at the cusp of our democracy as a country.
Okay.
That needed very careful monitoring. It needed building capacity of as many local actors as possible.
Yeah.
What Global Rights does is build capacity to create a culture of good governance and human rights. And I think that we've been successful. There are many organizations that have been birthed out of that movement that we had initiated, and they're doing a good job. So why don't we work in areas that are still in need of capacity building? Natural resource governance, particularly for mining, is one of those areas, and we focused on that. Security and human rights is another new area that I think a lot of people were surprised when 10, 12 years ago, Global Rights decided to start to work on security and human rights. But I think that wisdom is proved right by our children. 12 years later, no one can think of Global Rights not working on security and human rights issues, considering what's been going on in West Africa and particularly in Nigeria.
Interesting. So let's explore a little more about your nocturnal activity. You are a writer by night, an activist by day. So recently you screened a play. So what's all that about? Was that your first stage play, or have you done series?
That's my third stage play. But then that I think is, for me, my most important stage play. It bears a lot of personal resonance with me, and I find that when people watch it, that they actually deeply connect with it. So yes, it's not my first play.
Interesting. So what's the motivation to write Sobearer?
Sobearer is the story of the Egba Women's Revolt. And it's a bid to connect us with our history. I had written it 13 years ago.
Interesting.
And I'd come home and I had decided to stay at my grandmother's house. She was still alive then. And I was reading a book, just one of those days when I actually had the time to. And she came in to where I was, and she asked what I was reading, because she also loved to read. And I said, I'm reading Ake by Wole Soyinka. She said, oh, I knew him when he was a child. I knew him very well. I knew his mom. I was like, oh, yeah? Well, I'm reading about the Egba Women's Revolt. And she just smiled and she said, did you see me and my sisters in there? And see you and your sisters? And she said, yes, that they were part of the protest from the beginning to the end. But what was more interesting about that is that her father at that time was the Otun of the Egbas, which is, for the Egba nation, that would be the vice president. So it would be like the vice president's children, daughters, joining a protest
against the king.
Against the king and their father, as a matter of fact.
Interesting.
And that led to a whole discussion about how you build a nation, what the role of women are in nation building. And it made me think there's very little recorded history about the role that women have played in this country, in building a country called Nigeria. And at the cusp of every turning point in our history, you would have found women. You would have found the Aba Women's Revolt of 1929.
Yeah.
You find also that the women in what is now Akwa Ibom State, Okotikpene, also had their own revolt. Some women were killed as were in Aba Women's Revolt. The Abeokuta Women's Revolt was probably the most successful, that ran for 3 straight years. You've never had a street protest that ran for 3 years.
And Alake had to abdicate the throne.
As a matter of fact, it was my great-grandfather's best friend, and to have to make those decisions must have been quite a big deal in the past to say.
What was the motive? Because I'm interested in this history. Was it about taxation? Was it about representation? What exactly?
It was about all of the above. So taxation was the tipping point, was what drove the women to the streets. But in their protest, they brought out a lot of issues. First, the taxation. The taxation, and I think it's important to give context to why the taxation. This was at the end of the Second World War, where the British Empire needed resources. They had become almost bankrupt. And so they turned to their colonies and started to tax people massively. For example, you had the polling tax as well in Lagos, which Iyoloja Belewura led the protest against. And you were tasking people who were barely making ends meet themselves. And yet there was no development. Schools, hospitals, the same issues we have today were the issues they had back then. But worse still, there was a high degree of corruption alongside with the very high taxes. And the question for the women was, you can't continue to deal with us in this manner and expect that we will sit back quietly. They also were not very happy that the Native Governing Council did not have female representation. And so they demanded for representation, and all of the leaders of the women's protest eventually became representative at the Native Council. And I'm sure that, thinking back to the month of March and what happened in Nigeria, it was like we're going 360 degrees back to what happened. So all of the things that are happening now are exactly the things that the women had to deal with back then. And it just resonated so deeply with me then. But I'd written this 13 years ago, of course.
Why don't you also, is there a book on this Egba Women's Riot or Egba Women's Protest? Are there books out there published, authored?
Well, apart from my play and apart from people recounting their memory, like Wale Soyinka recounting the few instances, I had to do a lot of research in the at the museum, that we really don't have books that document this. But I think this is a great idea to try to put all of those struggles.
I will encourage you to do that.
That women have led in this country.
I think we need to document. That's the problem with this country. A lot has happened, and I'm happy you were talking of things have moved 360 degrees. But the more things change, the more they remain same. Yes. So you could see over the decades, we're talking over 100 years ago, yes, we are still facing the same issue.
Where exactly? I mean,
I wish our children could also learn, because it's very easy for us. The little history and civics I learned from primary, secondary school is what I'm still parroting every day. Oh, you know, about women's rights, 1929. But what actually gave rise to those issues? We do not have those facts. Yes. I'm getting to know that the protest against the Alake was for 3 years. I even thought it's just 1-2 days protest. Now you are making that. It's a big deal for something that happened when, you know, women were relegated to the background, and for them to have sustained a struggle for that length of time, and saw to the abdication of the throne by the then Alake of Egbaland, should be documented, yes, for purpose of posterity. Yes. I mean, people have also talked about the Efusheta Uniwura in Oyo State, in Ibadan, that even the book that was produced by Professor Akinwumi Ishola did not actually give a positive slant to the woman for her success in business and entrepreneurship, yes, and that people were looking at her more like a wicked person. Because she played by the rule.
Yes, she did.
If you know the story, if you've read I've read the book and I've watched the play, she played by the rule. None of my slaves should get pregnant. Yeah. Why then should you go and get pregnant? So if you are now killed, you should blame yourself for the indiscipline of that. But the slant people have is this is a witch, a very wicked lady, and all of that. But people in that time knew that she should have been given credit for the success in industry, in entrepreneurship. For a lady, a titled lady, to earn so much success in trade and commerce should have been. Look at Tinubu, Madam Tinubu, also in Ogun State. The contribution she made. So I'm throwing that challenge to you. Please do more research, and let's have some books, documenting this.
For example, Mrs. Mrs. Olufumlayo Ransom Kuti, when she taught in civics at school today, they simply say she was the first woman to ride a car.
Yeah, I've read that.
And that is all what children know about her.
About her, yeah.
But that she sacrificed all of those years. Now, you also need to know her children to understand the impact that had on her family. She sacrificed all of those years. That brought up very radical children. But at the same time, that you have to commend the children as well, because she obviously was rarely there. The house was always filled with people from one problem to the other. That was commendable.
Anyway, history will be kind to you to also document your own entry, your own enterprise as a leading light in the civic space in this contemporary period. So, Abby, let's go to the core of our discussion. Transparency and accountability in the extractive industry in Nigeria. Run us through. You've done a lot of research in this. You and I were on a platform back in January, and I saw the fluency with which you are rolling out figures, statistics of so many things that happen in the extractive industry in Nigeria, which are not documented, which you will not find in many other popular literature. So, run us through exactly where are we with the Nigerian extractive industry, particularly the mining sector.
Well, the mining sector is the sector that people have largely ignored in our country. We've paid a lot of attention to hydrocarbons, to the petroleum industry. We know a lot about the rot in the petroleum industry, and I'm happy to say that at least Nigeria is beginning to climb our way slowly out with the unbundling of the NNPC. But for the solid minerals sector, no one really thinks of Nigeria as a solid mineral destination. But Nigeria is bleeding massively from the lack of transparency in its solid minerals sector. Now, literally every state in Nigeria has some form of solid mineral or the other, even the FCT with its limestone and other parts of the country as well. If you think about gold, you think Zamfara, you think Kaduna, a bit of Kano, definitely Niger, Osun State. The alluvial belt that runs all the way from Zamfara all the way down to Osun State is a single belt that doesn't break. And all that is gold. And so we are losing, for example, $5 billion every year to gold unaccounted for in Nigeria.
Artisanal mining of gold.
Well, to the unregulated mining, I would say, not just artisanal mining. Some of them are small-scale mining, but yes, about 5 billion. Most of the gold every year from
gold alone.
Gold.
You are not talking about all the solid
all the other minerals, and we cannot fully account for them. And you can check NATI's report, and NATI is. We must commend NATI because they are really working very hard to account for the solid minerals in Nigeria. If you think about the sapphires in Taraba State, those are totally unaccounted for at all. Wow. Nobody knows how much sapphires, and we have the best sapphires in the world. Wow. Nobody knows how much sapphire is leaving Taraba State. The one sector that we seem to account for a bit more is limestone. And that is because the big companies like Dangote, like Lafarge, Boa, they can't get away with harvesting this mineral, the limestone, because of the construction work that is done with them without accounting for them. So most of the revenue that the government is making from solid minerals is from rocks and stones by companies like Dangote. As a matter of fact, Dangote seems to have the highest remittance of royalties to the government. But when you think about the amount of gold that is leaving the country, then you ask yourself, what's going on in this area?
I learned there's a place in Dubai where they call it
the gold is Nigerian gold.
Nigerian gold, yes. Market.
Yes, Nigerian gold. And a lot of our minerals are also found in China. China is massively receiving solid minerals from Nigeria unaccounted for. And the question is, how does this happen? It's very easy to just say, oh, the Ministry of Mines and Steel Development needs to up their game. Yes, they do. But then there are other factors. Our borders are very porous. If you can successfully run guns, you can successfully run rice through our borders, you can successfully run human traffic through our borders, then running minerals is child's play at all. It's not just the borders, not just the land borders, but also the air borders that people also attempt to carry things out, because we're also not training our custom officers to recognize these minerals. Sometimes what they claim to be taking out as samples are actually real clean minerals that are worth a lot, and they don't pay any taxes on them, and then they go. Also, that our taxing regime is so poor and porous that it's very hard to tell exactly how much a company should remit. Sometimes they're double taxation, and sometimes that they get away with no taxation at all when they're having a very good yield of minerals. Also, that our laws, while our laws focus on large-scale mining, 80% of mining in Nigeria is artisanal in nature. And we've not equipped the Ministry of Mines and Steel Development. The budget of the Ministry of Mines and Steel Development is ridiculous. compared to the type of work that we expect of them as a country. Now, in 2018, when 2015, I think it was, when President Buhari had come in as president, they had developed a roadmap for mining, saying, oh, we'll diversify the economy to agriculture and mining. But as a country that we have not been serious about it, and we're paying the consequences for it. So apart from the lack of transparency, that it is part of the security issues that we're also suffering in Nigeria. So you only need to think about just the gold belt in Nigeria and the conflicts in the gold belt. Zamfara, Niger, Taraba. Well, Taraba's issue is a bit different because that's sapphires. Kaduna and Osun State, when you think about the south, also Ebonyi State. Those places where you find gold. Ebonyi, well, you don't have to find a lot of gold, but there is some gold in there. Osun State being the representation of the southwest where there is gold, that you find two things they have in common, gold and conflict. That this is very, very common. Zamfara's conflict has gone back as far back that I do remember the issues happening there. As far back as 2010, while the the lead poisoning was going on in that
that's
state.
the one that many people know about.
That's
Zamfara,
what they know about
the
Zamfara.
lead poisoning that led to the killing of many children and all of that.
Yes, so
but people never address their minds to the issue of artisanal mining of gold and the connivance. It's been insinuated that there are international collaborators in fueling this crisis.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
Definitely. Now, let's start from the lead poisoning. Okay. Nigeria had the worst case of gold mining related lead poisoning in that period.
Lead is a mineral on its own.
It's a mineral on its own.
So what's the nexus between lead and gold?
Yes. So the unique thing about gold in Nigeria, gold and lead, is that they coexist. It's very, very interesting. So it coexists in increasing to decreasing measure. So you have a lot of gold with a bit of lead all the way from Zamfara going down in that measure till you get to Ebonyi, where it's more lead with a bit of gold coexisting with lead. Now, that gold mining had gone on for a long time in Zamfara, till the Chinese had also come in there and a few other national interests, but the one that we're most sure of are the Chinese. And they had wanted the artisanal miners to produce faster and higher, and had provided them with grinding machines to produce the gold nuggets faster.
Okay.
Now, the artisanal miners in those villages, Anka, Bukuyum, Dareta, could not meet up as fast as possible. And so they started to take the nuggets home to mill overnight and grind. Zamfara State at that time also had the most number of out-of-school children in Nigeria. And of course, Nigeria has the most number of out-of-school children in the world. But that's been fast overtaken by the Northeast with the crisis in the Northeast. But at that time, you had parents with their children grinding those nuggets, and a lot of the dust falling in homesteads. A lot of that dust contained a lot of lead. And those children got poisoned by the lead. They're very close to the ground. They're children. They're not going to school. They're helping their parents grind the nuggets. Women were also using the grinding stones in their homes to grind the nuggets, and afterwards would cook.
Thanks very much for staying tuned. So I had to pause Barrister Mrs. Abiodun Bayewu. Sorry for stopping your train of thought, but you were talking about what led to
the lead poisoning in Zamfara. Yes. So the children got poisoned. From the figures of just the children that died at Medicine Sans Frontières clinic, over 700 children died.
What?
The Nigerian government, over 700 at the clinic. A lot of children also were not taken to the clinic because initially they thought it was an outbreak of cholera. A lot of parents also kept their children at home and died. The Nigerian government keeps talking about a figure of 300 children. But then, I mean, just those that died at the clinic at Medicine Sans Frontières were more than 700. But at the same time, while this was happening and it was recognized as a national disaster, what Nigeria failed to recognize, and we had flagged it then, was that, look, there's an ongoing conflict in Zamfara that is related to the minerals. So there are instances where you get villages, communities, mining communities raided. And to steal the nuggets, sometimes they would actually bury miners alive. And those led to reprisals. Yes, as far back as 2010, I was aware of that because I used to go to Anka, Dareta, Bukuyum, those communities, Bagega, where all of this was going on. And that a lot of the raiders would cross the borders into the community because we share very close borders with Niger Republic. And the communities sometimes will retaliate, and this had gone on back and forth for a while. But at that time also, Nigeria was beginning to experience the crisis in the Northeast. And our biggest problem when that started is if the terrorists begin to think deeper, that it's very likely that they would begin to raise the monies they need to fund their cause from natural resources in Nigeria, because artisanal mining was going on everywhere, totally under the radar of government, unregulated. And that gold was most definitely one of the ways in which they would seek to enrich themselves. I'm sad that 12 years later, we were not wrong. It's very painful. So now you have a mix of those who have run away from the Northeast, run into the Northwest. You have the ongoing conflict between the communities in the Northwest and the bandits that have raided them, but have now taken on the dimension of terrorism and yet of reprisal attacks back and forth, and have become very, very powerful warlords in that region as well. And this is bothersome. And so it's not just Zamfara. So if we said, oh, that was just Zamfara, that's not a problem. That you think about Niger State, we also had the lead poison in Niger 2 years later, as though a warning to say, look, the minerals that you are not accounting for would also result in a lot of crises. Niger State is in deep crisis today that we are all aware of. The conflict is bad, or the attacks are really bad. The kidnappings, the attacks on communities, and you wonder, these very poor communities, why would you attack extremely poor communities? It's just taking over territories. Part of the issues in Kaduna State as well is we've got a lot of nickel in Kaduna, and the question is, who is going to own that land? So displacing the communities who have traditionally owned that land is a very easy way to take over the resources in those lands. And endlessly like that. Also, the artisanal miners are migrants. So you also have a mix of a lot of foreigners. You go to some places, or at least when I used to go to the field in Niger State, where some of the miners did not speak English and did not speak Hausa. They spoke Fufud, they spoke French. And so you realize they're from other West African countries and not from Nigeria. You even had miners from Ghana. And those things are contributing to the insecurity in our country. But then that we've refused to let that sector be transparent, even if it's not a major contributor to our economy, that it has the potential to be. Not just does it have a potential to be a major contributor to our economy, it also has a major potential to be a national security issue. Not potential, it's definitely now a national security issue that we must nip in the bud, ensure transparency, ensure accountability in the sector, ensure that government is also getting the revenue that we need, because oil money is gone. And for us to be able to build a nation from that.
So, I'm really shocked to my marrow, this level of the connecting the dots between mining and conflicts. And, you know, when you went to the field and you documented all of this, what's next? What were actually your programmatic activities that led you to making those daring moves? I call it daring moves because as a lady going to conflict-prone areas, even to interview people is a lot of risk. I'm not sure you are wearing bulletproof. So it's a lot of risk you took and your staff or whoever you engaged to do that. Well, what was the motivating factor for you to want to go into those conflict areas, to see things and document? What were your programmatic activities towards those areas?
Well, we're working on natural resources and human rights, particularly working in Zamfara State, for example, bringing out the human rights and governance issues of the lead poisoning in that state. To say that it was not just a public health issue, that this is a governance issue before it became a public health issue. Also having them to work in other states and do assessments on the solid mineral sector. Plateau State, for example, as at the time when the discussion in Plateau was that, oh, this is a Christian-Muslim herders-farmer conflict, that we were saying, look, this is beyond religion. The religions coincidentally worked with the livelihoods. You had a lot of Muslims who were herders, a lot of farmers who were Christians. That was just coincidence. It was the fight for natural resources, the main natural resource being land, water, and also the minerals, the tin, columbites in the Jos Plateau that people were not paying attention to. You had artisanal miners digging very deep holes, 60-feet holes. You had cows falling in. You had herders thinking, oh, we can't forgive this. The farmers deliberately did this. Meanwhile, it was the miners, and you had them then, the conflicts in those communities based on that. And also that the land, when Jos Plateau was in 120 years ago, 150 years ago, the population wasn't that dense. We also didn't need to produce so much food in those areas. We're producing all that much food. We've also lost a lot of the land to unremediated mining. After mining, they just left those places desolate. If you go to Plateau State for the first time, you may be confused whether what you're looking at is erosion or just poor mining management. And the truth is, it's largely poor mining management, not erosion. Erosion is what we have in the southeast. I can understand erosion in Ebonyi State, Anambra State, Imo State, but not in Plateau State, considering that it is a plateau, and that those contributed to the conflicts. In Niger State, we had the same issues. We were working on issues of mercury, the amalgamation of gold with mercury, and so we had gone to train the communities and the miners that Nigeria has signed the Minamata Convention on mercury, and really you can't use mercury unregulated anymore. But then to discover that high number of foreign miners in those places, to go into those communities in Shikira when the gold mining, the lead poisoning had happened, and to realize that this was totally going on unregulated, anyone could move in. There was a lot of movements that were not kosher at all at that time, and here we are, in spite of the warnings.
So, you did those, and what those documented findings and the early warnings, why were they neglected? Did you not report to the appropriate quarters or authority? We have set up Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative since 2005, if my memory serves me right.
Yes, that is correct.
And we have Ministry of Mines and Steel
Development. Yes.
So these are government agencies or ministries and departments. So why did they refuse to act?
Well, first of all, the bureaucracy of government. That you mention things to them and they think because of the sector you work in that you like to magnify issues that are really small. But then there are really no small issues. Issues grow. A stitch in time would save nine, and we had one back as far back then. NATIA, like I said, has done a great work, and if you read through their reports, you will find hints of the things we had said to them and that they are taken seriously. The Ministry of Mines and Steel Development is still grossly underfunded. Their staff need a lot of capacity building. They need a lot of equipping. I'll just use Niger State as an illustration. Now, Niger State is 1/10 the size of the whole of Nigeria. It's the biggest state in the country. As at the time when the lead poisoning happened at Shikira, you had a very, very, and I'll try to remember his name, and maybe it's Sobearer or something. You had a very devout mining officer in that state. But there were just 4 officers to cover a state the size of 1/10 of Nigeria, which also potentially has the highest amount of minerals in the entire country. They had 1 vehicle. And the lead poisoning happened. The staff knew about it. We were going there. They had, amongst themselves, had to raise the money because the ministry could not afford at that time, and I say it advisedly, to provide them with enough fuel to go all the way to Shikira. Now, from Minna to Shikira, because I used to travel it, I can tell you authoritatively, in the dry season, it takes 7 hours to get from Minna to Shikira. In the rainy season, it takes up to 9 hours. There are absolutely no road to Shikira. And that was the epicenter of this lead poisoning disaster in that state. Now then, think that just 4 officers covering that entire state, which is 1/10 the size of a large country like Nigeria, that they were under-equipped. They didn't have sufficient manpower. We also don't have the surveillance equipment that a country needs to ensure that mining is effectively covered. We need to invest more in mining if we want to take mining seriously. And we cannot afford not to take mining seriously because we've got minerals. We've got at least 40 major minerals in this country. You've got 36 states. How do you then prevent artisanal mining, or rather unregulated mining, because some of the large-scale mining companies are also acting very irresponsibly. The coal mining companies are polluting the water sources. Lafarge in Gombe State, Etazuma and Dangote in Kogi State. You've got all of those issues going on. But how much resources are you investing in dealing with these issues so that you can actually raise money and ensure that they don't give you more problems than joy?
So let's be point blank about this. How much of this issue has to do with corruption? Because I want us to really hit the nail on the
head.
Is it that government, for instance, does not realize the importance of solid minerals to contributing to national GDP? Is it that, I recall that during the very short tenure of OBS Ekwesili as Minister of Solid Mineral, after she was, I think she was moved from education to solid mineral. She set up cadastre and all of those highfalutin words that doesn't make sense to ordinary citizens. And it was in a bid to regulate, and get people licensed to operate some of these mining sites. What has happened? Is it that people are not showing interest, for instance, to come and invest in Nigeria's mining sector, that we have 80% of mining being artisanal? And with all the associated problems, you have issue of illegal migrants coming in, issue of conflict, issues around poor funding of even the ministry itself. And native, yes, may have been publishing reports. How much of implementation? I've attended to NATIV's report, even as an agency of government. So what's role? Let's take it from the role of corruption and just calibrate what the issues are, rather than modeling it up and believing that, it's just... because I don't think it's much of an ignorance issue.
No.
It's not so much about ignorance. Is it possible, for instance, Abby, that people in government are also helping themselves to process from these
minerals,
or setting up artisanal mining themselves?
I think I can count 5 questions in one already.
Really, I'm very emotive about this. I'm sorry if I'm putting you on too much on that.
But I will try.
It pains me. We have 60% revenue shortfall. This is one way we could
could
improve
have
our...
easily, very easily.
So why would a
revenue.
government of change not do the needful to liberate and ensure? If you can't do it, why don't you remove it from the exclusive legislative list and put it in concurrent? And let's take responsibility.
Well, there are many issues. First of all, like I always say, that corruption is not Nigeria's biggest problem. It's impunity. Impunity is our biggest problem. And corruption is just a manifestation of impunity, that you can do things and get away with it. And wherever you allow people to do things and get away with it, where the rule of law does not subsist, then of course you will have chaos and the kind of problems that we have and corruption. That said, that yes, there is corruption in the sector, but I would think that the chaos is not just from corruption. There's a lot of chaos in just not running governance effectively. So, Madam OBS Ekwesili had set up the mining cadastral office, had developed the 2007 laws, had put a number of governance effectively. Had set up the mining laws, had put a number of
to also join us on this discussion. The number to call if you are interested in asking Abby a question is 0809-987-1989. That is our studio line. It's on your screen, 0809-987-1989. If you are interested in knowing more about issues of transparency and accountability in Nigeria's extractive industry. An extractive industry we are focusing on today is the mining sector. because the extractive industry is very large. We have the oil and gas, but today we are actually, in fact, people have already started calling. Let's take this call. Oh. Please do call back. Please make it short and hello?
Hello?
Yes, tell us your name and where you are calling from. Oh. Please, when you call, tune down the volume of your TV set and tell us your name and where you are calling from, and then your question or comment. Thank you. So, Abby, we are on the home stretch. So, let's look at the way forward now. What are the things we need to do? Election is coming. We are going to have a new set of over how many thousands positions will be filled next year. I did a calculation of the number of political offices we have in Nigeria, and it comes to 11,080. And that's if you discount the vice and the deputies. You know, I excluded them because they are just running mates and all of that. But 11,080, if you had those ones, maybe it comes to close to 12,000.
12,000.
Now, we are going to be replacing most of them next year. What should we be doing differently? But this call first. Hello? Hello? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Your name and where you are calling from, please.
Hello?
Yes, good morning. Good morning. Tell us your name and where you are calling from. Hello? Oh. Okay, maybe let's take your response. Maybe we'll be lucky to take one or two calls before you.
I think that whoever is going to be our next president, the state governors, should think deeply about employing technocrats and not just a reward system for political positions. We are at a tipping point in Nigeria that if we don't get it right, this is our last call. If we don't get it right, we may just combust this nation very shortly. The Ministry of Mines and Steel Development needs experts in its leadership. You must commend the current minister. Also, I always say Dr. Fayemi has done phenomenal work in that area. But we need technocrats. We need very strong technocrats running things in this country. And there are many, and they are available. President Obasanjo had tried to do a bit more of that, bringing technocrats back into the country, and we've succeeded in driving them back away. The other thing is that as Nigerians, we must demand accountability. Let's do an audit of what this 11,080 positions have done so far. Where did they fail us? So that we will know where to hold the next set of people accountable. So that they begin to sign charters with people and groups to say, this is what I will do. I will subject myself to being measured regularly to see if I am fulfilling my mandates. And not just say, I will give you water, I will give you light, I will give, but then you're also bringing insecurity. You're also bringing poverty to us without the water. Measured regularly to my mandate to see if I am fulfilling my mandate. To see if I am fulfilling my mandate. To see if I am fulfilling my mandate. My mandate. My mandate.